Has anyone gotten any comments or anything, or any public comment? I haven't either. All right, let's call this meeting to order. This is not an emergency meeting. Well, it's in emergency format, but this is the scheduled city council meeting for the city of Grand Marais. The roll call shows that we have all 5 councilors present. We have City Administrator Roth. We've got Finance Director Dunsmore. We've got Communication Director Patrick Knight, and we've got City Attorney Chris Hood, all present. That makes 9, which is what I count present on my streaming thing. So then, open forum, I just asked, but I don't think it made. Does anybody have any comments for the open forum that you have received? I saw shaking heads the first time. Do we have shaking heads this time?
I had one thing, but it's too late, Jay. Somebody had commented about street cleaning when they do it, if we could put some sort of announcement out that people would then kind of, park maybe alternatively, possibly in a backyard, whatever. They were basically trying to be helpful in getting the streets clean, but that's already done. So just a thought that we might want to share for next year, something of Patrick to be aware of. I know that we don't always know exactly the schedules when it's going to be done, but I thought it was worth a mention anyway. So just sharing their idea.
Cool. All right. Anything else? I have gotten a couple of comments about the temporary streetlights that have come up at 5th and 5th, or that are showing up at 5th and 5th. People are very curious, so I think that'll be on all of us to just keep that, keep explaining that to people, what's going on.
I actually didn't know about it, so I called Patrick when they were there working and said, "Hey, what's happening?" Because I did not know. I don't know how I missed that, but I had no idea.
Yeah. Okay, so hearing no other open forum comments, we'll move on to the consent agenda. Typical consent agenda, 3 items. This agenda, so if there's something that we want to add to the agenda, now is the time. We also have previous meeting minutes and the payment of bills. So unless someone would like to pull something for discussion or add to the agenda, I would entertain a motion to approve that.
I would make that motion.
Okay, there's a motion. Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Okay, so we've got a motion from Moody, a second from Kennedy. We will go through roll call. I'm just going to go down on my screen in the order that everybody shows up. So, Councilor Moody, your vote.
Yes.
Councilor Swearingen.
Aye.
Councilor Schulte.
Yes.
Councilor Kennedy.
Aye.
And I am an aye as well. Consent agenda passes. So we're going to move right on to the meat of the business. So we started a project for updating the city code and working on how we could make the city code enforceable. We started that last year after talking about it for a number of years and gathered a bunch of information. So now we have an update on the results of that information and potentially some direction moving forward. So with that said, let's jump in. So then turning that over to Mike and to Patrick to kind of speak to all that information. I'm sure you'll probably share screens and stuff, but we can follow along in the packet as well.
So we're not going to do a presentation where we go point by point through what's included in the packet. It's there for your information, and we're happy to answer any questions or have any conversation that you want to have about it. I think that we just wanted to put this back on the agenda because we're finished with our latest effort, and we think we're ready to get to the point where the council has a conversation about this. So you can see in the memo that's included in the packet, our plan would be to schedule a work session where staff will have developed a list of things that we're already doing or that are already related to these issues, and then we'll get a chance to kind of go through and think about what do these issues mean to us based on the input we've received over the past year and a half, and what are the solutions that we're interested in pursuing. So what did you all think?
I was a little sad that the demographics had no one in their 20s and 30s. One person in their 40s. I think we're missing a vital group, and not that that's anything that, you know, we as a city group did or ignored people. I think sometimes it's really hard to get people to participate and to try to find those people to participate. The one thing I saw quite a bit of, and I'm in agreement, is we can put all these ordinances in place, but if we're willing to really dig in and follow them and enforce them, they don't mean anything. So I think the group felt that was necessary, and I keep hearing from the public that why do we do these things if we aren't going to enforce them? And I think that we have to make a decision as a council if that is the direction and the route we want to go, and how we want to proceed, and how we want to basically let our staff know what our desire is and where we want to go forward with that, because I don't want to spend time making rules or ordinances if we're not willing to do the work and follow and back up what we're putting in place. Just kind of a really brief summary of a couple things I saw there, but that's part of my thoughts.
Okay, and I would agree with Kelly on a lot of that. When I was looking through the packet, I was pleased that it seemed like there were a couple of things that were you know, kind of low-hanging fruit. You know, just defining things better, making sure that people understood, you know, understood what certain definitions meant, things like that. But those, I honestly don't think are the ones that are the more continuous issues. You know, the ones that were continuous issues, like, you know, people talked about accumulation of trash and about the blocking of public ways. And for those, that's, you know, the city is going to have some investment in that as well for improving or, you know, standardizing some of our infrastructure so that stuff actually works. And then that was I saw that in the recommendations. I might be reading into it a little bit more deeply than it was originally meant, but that's how I took it. And I would agree that, you know, this is going to require the city to step up to fulfill our part of any kind of agreement on what the state of any of these, well, the state of these three things would be in the city. The city has a role in each of those, is what I'm saying. So we just need to figure that out. So
I'll just step in quick and say that's great. That's a good observation on both of your parts, that this isn't entirely about rule following for other people. There are things that we need to do, but for those things that we decide are important enough to the community that require rule following, they need enforcement as well. The focus groups are not the only thing we're going to rely on. They're just the latest, and obviously you saw some of the demographic shortcomings of it. It's not meant to be a community survey. It's meant to be one example of a deeper discussion with a group of community members to help us understand what some of these issues might mean to some people. We did consider some follow-up focus groups to try and fill in some of those gaps, but obviously, given the current circumstances, that seems really difficult. So that's something that we can decide to do in the future if, this is an ongoing effort. Obviously, we can circle back when it makes sense and try and grab some of those other demographic groups, or maybe there'll be some other people that decide they're interested when we do start creating some new rules or new programs.
So, Mike, I have a question too. So this is, I mean, all this information was gathered over, the course of a year and a half, 2 years. So what does this mean for other parts of the city code that we've deemed unenforceable or that are unenforceable? We've identified 3 areas of community life basically to focus on, and we've put focus group attention towards that. What is that? How does that play out with other parts of community life that may be reflected in the current code but are not enforceable, or that the way that those ordinances are written are just not feasible or helpful?
I don't think I'd characterize any of the code the way you just described it. It's all enforceable, and it's not our intent to say we won't be enforcing anything other than those 3 items that the community identified. We're just trying to make an effort at prioritizing. So anytime there is an issue where someone is doing something in violation of the city code, it's our expectation that our law enforcement services are there to deal with that. And it's been our experience that avenue is available for people, that you can always call law enforcement if someone's violating city code, and law enforcement does have an obligation to take what they deem an appropriate step. One of the things that when we talked about our relationship with the sheriff's office for law enforcement, that it would be helpful is if we can provide them with some of our priorities in terms of the things we'd like to see them focus on, so that rather than just be complaint based, which is all the code is currently enforceable based on complaints, we might actually have them go out and do some proactive work on some of these issues that the community have said are important to them, where the law enforcement anyway is the solution. And obviously there are other programs that we intend to talk about and think about doing that are not enforcement based to try and deal with some of these issues. And I thought that the focus groups had some good conversations about those ideas. There are other ones as well. There are other examples of things like that out there. And of course, Jay, what you already mentioned, there are things where the city has a responsibility to improve some of the services that we're providing in order to address some of these issues. So we'll get all those angles.
Anybody else have any thoughts or questions on this? I mean, this is kind of an update, kind of bringing us all up to speed about where we're at. We still have to figure out what the next step is, but I think that that's going to be driven mostly by staff, by taking a look at the information that was gathered and the recommendations that were made to see how we can incorporate that and adjust the code. But anything else from council? Anything else from you guys?
Yeah, I think that, a lot of the details of this discussion are going to take place when we have a workshop and start to deal with the more specific aspects of it. But, I think starting it off with this whole concept of enforcement is probably a good approach, in that without enforcement, the changes or modifications to the code really aren't going to result in anything. So we have to be committed to wanting to make sure that whatever we do is something that is going to be not only enforced but recognized in the community as regulations that we expect people to follow.
Right. And I do think, Mike, you mentioned the idea, or maybe Patrick mentioned it, the idea of having having some follow-up focus groups, and I think that would probably be a good idea as well. To take a look at the possibility of doing that. course, before we do that, we have to figure out what the intention of that would be, so that we would have those follow-up focus groups, actually assess something useful instead of just meeting for the sake of meeting. So maybe that's something we can look into. But there was something else I was gonna ask for an update on this. So we were gonna have the League of Minnesota Cities Legal Center help us digitize and update the rest of the code. Do we have an update on that? We hired them last year, I believe. Okay, cool. But have they given us any update on that? I mean, that's been going for a while. Okay. Well, I assume that makes sense, but. Okay, anything else on the update for the code update? Update on the code update? Hearing none. Okay, so then let's move on to the next item. So the next item that we have on the agenda is discussion about the City Hall liquor store design and progress that's been made on that, some summaries of expense and who's going to do what. And we have, we're at a point where we need to start making some decisions about this. So Mike, will you want to break this down for us so that we can kind of know exactly what's the point that we're at right now as far as decision making and where the rubber hits the road, so to speak.
If you'll recall, when we last had Bruce at a meeting to talk about the pre-design concept work, they looked at a potential schedule that included finishing a complete design in a way that we could do construction next construction season. And that schedule that they had put together and shown us basically said, we can't pause, we have to keep going. We really are probably about a month behind where it is right now. So first I'll update you on where they're at with their work, because obviously it's been slowed down a little bit. They're not in the office at all. They're all working remotely, and they're still working on the design, and they expect in another 3 to 4 weeks to be done incorporating all the comments that were made in the last few meetings, and also having McGough had a chance to review what they came up with and look through their cost estimates and give their opinion about cost as well. At that point, we'll have a finished product with the concept work and be ready to move on. In the meantime, I asked them to give us this proposal for design work, because if we still intend to move forward as if the project's going to happen next year, we at least need to start talking about this next step now. And here it is in front of us to look at and think about. And I think the real question is our strategy still to act as if we're going to do this next year, or has enough things happened where that doesn't make sense anymore? And I guess I'm hoping to hear what you think about that.
Yeah, jump in, everybody. This is a pretty interesting, pretty interesting conversation. And talking about, in some ways, this being a really good time to do this, in some ways, it's not being a good time at all. So I'm interested in what you all think about it. So chime in, then I'll tell you what I think.
Let me start with it then. Now, this has been a project that we've been talking about for a long time, and it's something that the city has needed. It's been identified as a priority. I think even with the situation we're in right now, I think we still need to continue moving forward, maybe being a little bit more cautious in terms of construction scheduling. But for the long run, I think the project is still going to be the same project that we envisioned before COVID. And my only thought is that we may just be looking at a little bit different schedule if things don't change, or maybe if things do change. We have to be able to react to the current COVID situation in terms of our scheduling. But my thought is that we need to continue our planning to move forward and be prepared to move on this when the opportunity is right.
Okay, thank you, Tim. Anyone else?
I guess I would like to see us continue to move forward. But I also want us to take a bit of a look at some of the lessons we've maybe learned with what's happened with COVID. Not that we have to do carry out next when we have a new building, but do we have maybe some options for a window of a pickup outside type thing, or a drive-through? What does that demographic look like to the people that live here? Can we opt for some of those changes? What are we thinking? Or are we just staying with the same old norm? I think that we have a new world going forward as to how some things are done. But I also would like to see us continue to move forward. And I hope that very soon things can start to open up, the economy can start to move forward. And I think this would be a good way for us to support that movement, is to say, yes, we plan to go forward with that.
Thanks. That's what I get for trying to be responsible for muting myself. So, Kelly, can you clarify that? Are you saying continue to move forward on the schedule that we have previously identified, or to be flexible in the scheduling, or reassess scheduling altogether?
Well, I think we can be flexible on the scheduling, because I don't think we really know yet what higher government will dictate. But I want to see us continue to move. Originally we were talking about trying to get things in place that something could happen by early next year. I don't think we're probably still looking at that if we're realistic, but could it happen mid next year? Hopefully. I want it to keep going forward. The amount of money that we have to spend, I will admit, makes me a little nervous. I think if we recognize that we're going to be spending money, at some point we're going to have to allow opening some of the things as the government allows us to, the park, the golf course, and doing some things to recoup that. We talked about at one of our special meetings what we've currently lost in electrical, PUC, how things dropped by 10% when the motels shut down, what we're losing in rec park revenues, potential through the marina, the golf course. Those are all of concern. And so I think that $350,000 price tag concerns me, but at the same time, I want to go forward with it, saying I believe in our economy and I want to move forward as soon as we possibly can to safely start to get things going again. But that's my stance.
Okay, thanks for clarifying that. Anybody else?
I'll go if
Go ahead.
I think if whether we decide to slow things down or try to keep to that initial, like, this is still our first step that we have to do. So I would say that I think that we should move forward on this. One of the questions I had, I was maybe a little bit surprised at the cost. I guess especially with some of the assumptions that were then associated with it on stuff that either the city has to provide or the items that then they would add as additional services. And I don't know if, this is what, about 8% of the cost is what they're plugging in as a number right now. Is that pretty close? I mean, generally speaking, 8%.
7.
7. Excuse me. I didn't do the math. I just guessed. So yeah, I mean, do we know the site survey? That's not me. The site survey, that shouldn't be too big of a deal, but I don't know about like geotech. And I don't even, what's construction phase testing? I don't even know what that is. Any idea, anybody?
No.
Well, you're the construction guy.
Well, so, and then,
Anton, that's testing during construction. So like materials testing or
okay.
you know.
Okay, and that's the thing. I guess I was trying to figure out like what some of the soft costs are versus like, you know, because obviously 5 million is our construction cost. So this 350 is on top of our construction cost. It isn't included within the 500, right? Or 5 million, is that right? So this is a soft cost, which if we're going to try and do this, it's something that we're going to have to do, much like geotech and survey work and those types of things. Whether we were building a 100,000 or a $1 million project or a $20 million project, we're going to have certain soft costs. But I think one of my questions, the one that I think in the additional services, and this is maybe a question on what McGough would offer, is the value engineering side of it, which, you know, can go, I mean, really, the McGough is going to look at what the number comes back at and then is going to work with LHB to try and do value engineering, which would just basically mean them changing their design. So I guess I can kind of understand why that is an additional service. I don't know. I suppose you got to draw it first before you can value engineer it. But hopefully that they do a good job in drawing it, and the value engineering, there isn't, you know, they're already trying to find cost savings where they can, and also meeting all the criteria that we talked about last time Bruce was here, you know, as far as energy efficiencies go and that kind of stuff. Anyway, yeah, I guess that's kind of my take on it. Was a little maybe surprised and then a little, but okay, I think, with it, because I do think we should keep it going. And then questioning if we have any idea what those other soft cost outlays from the city are going to be. That's all I got.
Okay.
We don't have a budget that talks about any of those other items yet, and I think that there's some real variability potential in them. I mean, we know that there's been environmental issues on this site, although the site's closed, and we know there's neighboring ones, so there will be some testing involved there. We also know there's definite geotech work that needs to be done on this site before a real design can be completed, and it might be somewhat complicated because it needs to be done underneath an existing building. So I will have to continue to develop that, but I would expect it to be a noticeable amount. I think I'd add that McGough is involved potentially quite a bit more in the early stages of this than they were with our last project, that we really had a lot of the design work completed before our relationship with McGough was established. So I would envision them being much more of a team during the design phase. And so we can talk to McGough about what that looks like for them and that value engineering. But that's the next proposal that we need to look at, is what does McGough think about this project?
Sure.
Okay. Craig, you got any thoughts on this?
No, well, I mean, moving ahead, I think is important, but I'm kind of along the lines Kelly's along, is, you know, I kind of look at what's been happening lately as far as revenue stream and things like that. And I think it's important that we keep those in the back of our mind, those issues, as we start moving ahead with this. And like I said, schedule might change just based upon city financing is going, you know. It's a tough call right now to make, but as soon as we can get things open and running, I think the better for the city, obviously. And also getting the liquor store functioning be more so along the normal lines of revenue, you know. It's important too. So yeah, I don't know. That's kind of my thinking. Moving ahead, I think is good. I just think a schedule might be different. Maybe not, depending on how we you know, the summer's going to tell a lot, I guess, when we're sitting here in July or August. We'll have a better idea of how things are going to go for the city, but hopefully it's positive.
Yeah.
One other question that kind of ties into what Craig's saying. I mean, is there both a payment schedule on this? Is it at phases? Is there there's no sort of timeline at all attached to this, which I understand is scary to do with things the way they are, but not that we would, I mean, I guess my question is if we say it's going to be $350,000, or $350,000 for them to do all the aspects that they're laying out, if we're, I don't know, if they're doing construction administration, which is 80, not quite a third of this. Obviously, I'm assuming we don't have to pay that money until the construction is being administrated, right? So,
Anton, let me try to address what I think you're talking about. There's not a payment schedule, and I think we should ask for one. And I agree that it's going to be pretty daunting for them to put together an idea of how long this work's really going to take. I don't think that they have a good idea of that, because this is so different than the way that they've done their work in the past. Sure. Our services contract that we use for this type of work is one where we can say, we need you to stop, and we would only have to pay them for what they had done. So we might be able to augment that language a little bit, just with the idea that there's a much stronger chance that we might decide to pause this work at some point. And so maybe spending the next week having that conversation with LHB, trying to get a better idea of the outlay of the money, and talking about our standard language for stopping versus what we might want to have, and looking at that at your next meeting. We could have a better idea about that stuff.
And I think that would be important. And I also think that even just like, short of like a certain amount of deposit and down payment money, and then, payments due upon receivables. So when we get, to these different phases that they're going to work through, which gives us the chance to review and approve and also then pay. None of this is going to happen overnight. And so part of I think, Mike, what you were getting at was like, we'd have the ability to stop. And I think which I think is important, but I think also to what Craig was saying, and maybe Kelly too, that because time is going to elapse as we move through those processes, we hopefully will have a better sense that revenues will return to the city, and that we can feel better as we're getting input or getting information back from them, like, hey, the liquor store is open again, or the park is open again, or whatever it is. We're getting revenue back into the city to help us continue to feel comfortable. It's not like MnDOT where we're going to give them however much money that was in one shot before anything even started, right? Anyway, that's.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty important clarification to make. Yeah, it's not all coming out at the same time. So my perspective on this follows some similar lines to what other people have said. I start with the concept of paradigm shift, and that's one of the things that really I've been thinking about in a lot of the ways that business is done in Grand Marais these days. And that has to do with the design itself. I think we should probably look at the design and say, hey, what are the ways that this is this building still going to function in a time when we're on a lockdown or something like that? I feel like it would, because we've put enough thought into like the different compartments of it, so that we would be able to have the space necessary and be able to perform the services necessary in that space. But I think that's a good question to ask. Also, the question about finances I think it is really, it's really a timely question. Are the city finances going to change enough with a down year at the liquor store and the campground to make this project financially risky for our reserves and or for our borrowing? I think that those are fair questions that we should look at and ask. And then the final thing that comes to me is, at what point is the decision made for us? You know, I mean, I feel like if we're going to be planning on a 2021 build of a downtown building, then we not only have to get all of the site research done and get all of those soft cost projects that we've just been talking about started and done, so that we have that information to inform the process. We not only have to get that done, but we also have to figure out the staging for all of the city operations that are going to happen during that time. And if we're trying to set up and create all of those structures from a quarantine, pandemic, lockdown kind of situation, that could make it a lot easier, but it also could make it a lot harder to clarify how exactly we're going to deliver those services and where people are going to be and how they're going to act. I mean, it could be awesome because maybe just everybody gets to work from home or something like that. But it's I think we have a lot of questions that we have to answer as far as that's concerned. I do think that moving forward is the right thing to do. I think that we do need to move forward with the design. We need to move forward with the prep work that we can do to make sure that we have the information necessary to make sure that the foundations are stable and that the building is going to do what we need it to do. But those other questions, those are things that are concerns for me as well. So I don't know if there's any answer to that. We have any answer to that right now, i.e., at what point does the city's finances getting hit hard enough that we want to slow down this project or put it off to a time when we have better income or better revenues? And then also, at what point are we just too far behind to be able to get this done in 2021? So if anybody has answers to that, let me know. If we don't, then we should.
Yeah, I think those are all good points, Jay. And I think we just have to be flexible in terms of how we respond to this. With the idea, we'd like the project to move forward, but we may not be able to move forward if we find that the situation doesn't warrant it, that the revenues aren't there, that we just have too much uncertainty. We just have to go along with the idea that this may be the schedule we're working with, but it may not be the schedule that ultimately is what we use. So we may have to make some other decisions based on conditions that exist. And as much as that's changed in the last 3 months, I think we're going to see tremendous change in the next 3 months, and beyond that, who knows what could be the situation. So we have to be able to respond and recognize that. So one other question, and this is maybe for Mike and Chris. They make reference to using the standard AIA contract, and I know we ran into some problems with an AIA contract at the old swimming pool and a contractor we had there, and I'm wondering if we just need to be cognizant of using a standard contract for this?
We do, yes, we do need to be cognizant of that. And the document they have listed there, the B101, is probably not the right contract anyway. It's probably the B133. And if we are going to do construction manager at risk, we did an extensive review and markup of those contracts at that time. We did that. So, and that was a contract with LHB too. So if we're going to go through this whole process again, Mike and I are going to pull out those documents and use those again, aren't we, Mike?
Yeah, definitely. And I think that they probably want to do that too. That worked for everybody. I'm envisioning this project being handled exactly the same way.
So what are the next steps in this process? If we identify wanting to go forward with this, what do we need to do?
If you mean what does the council need to do, I've heard enough for now to keep moving. What we'll do at a staff level is have some more conversations following up with LHB about some of the issues we've talked about tonight. See if we can get a timeline updated for what this might look like. Talk about the idea, is it even feasible anymore to do 2021 construction? Roll McGough into the conversation in a formal way and look at their proposal, and then start sharing the contract documents with folks about that we used last time and make sure that those still make sense for everybody. So those are the steps that we'll be taking. And I think that hopefully LHB is watching right now. If not, we'll give them an update tomorrow about what you think, and they'll have a chance to watch when it's convenient for them. But that they'll have to start making their own preparations too to make sure that they're ready to do this for us.
And would it be possible, Mike, to at our next regularly scheduled meeting to have an update that addresses the questions and some of the concerns that the council has brought up in this conversation? I know that you're saying that what the staff is going to be doing is going to be working to tackle those things, but I feel like having an update at the next meeting would probably be a good thing for us to know where we're at and to keep it close to the forefront. If this is something that we really want to do, then we're going to have to get moving on it so that we don't, by default, miss the deadlines to make it happen and make it more difficult for the city if that's what happens. Or if it makes more sense for it if it's easier for the city just to have it be something that we put off. So is that something that would be realistic for the next meeting?
It's hard to say how much will be done by the next meeting. Keep in mind, it's a week from today when we want to have things ready for you to send them out so that you can look at them before next meeting. So we haven't had all those conversations with LHB, and will they know the answers to some of our questions, and will they get it back to us within the next week? I really can't say. In any case, it would be my intention that we'll keep talking about this probably most meetings as things are changing and occurring, as the work is being completed, as there's decisions that need to be made. This if we're serious about doing this project, it's going to kind of replace the public works garage as the one that requires our attention for an entire probably couple of summers. And between the code enforcement project, MnDOT's construction, and this, I think that'll keep you all very busy with regular things to do above and beyond some of the other things going on, like how do we keep the liquor store open and stuff where we probably don't need you to be directly involved in the conversation, but we do need to continue to keep hearing feedback from you. So I do want to say thank you for linking what's going on in the emergency world with the ability for us to continue on this project, and understanding that we need to kind of be cognizant of the need for some of those business type of operations of ours to continue to operate if we want to move on this project. And we'll just have to keep talking about that as well.
Okay, that sounds good. I'll probably ask next meeting just for an update if it's not on the agenda, just to see, then you could just say, we haven't heard back, we've contacted everybody or whatever, whatever the update is that we have. So I do think, yeah, it's good to discuss this. And I think that it's important that we keep it moving if this is a priority that we want to accomplish. So.
But I will tell you that if it's not something where there's an agenda item with materials for you to review, you'll at least get an update on Friday next week of where we're at.
Okay. Very good. Does anybody else have any questions about the City Hall liquor store design update? Nope. Okay, so then we'll move on. So there isn't a spot on the agenda for council updates, but I'll just open it up and ask if anybody has anything, and then just kind of raise your hand and go for it if you have an update. Go ahead, Tim.
Just a brief update. Last week we had a planning commission meeting and we met with Jeff Miller from HKGI, and we were talking about the zoning ordinance revisions. And I think we had a good discussion. We're talking about a couple different concepts of housing that are not currently in our zoning ordinance, and looking at ways that we can incorporate those in a new ordinance that would provide for higher density and maybe infill development, new types of development. And mainly what we're talking about is like a tiny house village development, or what do we call it? The other one, we called it courtyard house village development, which seemed fairly similar. The only difference was that the size of the structures might be smaller in a tiny house development. So we talked about those kind of concepts. We also talked about mobile home or manufactured home parks is another type of development option. And then we talked about the accessory dwelling on a property or in a home. And we're working to try to get the information kind of put together so that it would be available and we could start working to have community input on the standards that we're starting to put together. And I think we're still a ways off from having being ready for any kind of public hearing, but we're getting there. And so if any of you are interested in looking at that material, Mike could get it to you. I think we've had some good conversation, and I think once we open it up to the community, I think we'll have a lot more conversation. So
is it what's the timeline? I'd love that information, Mike. Yep. Okay. Awesome. I was just there yesterday. I'll look closer. What's the timeline? I mean, how does that move along with what's happening as far as trying to get some of that's, what's the next step on that? Then you said like just public feedback and open houses, but how do we do open houses?
We've been doing feedback. A lot of this work is based on feedback we gathered in the community visioning process, and also some larger focus groups with folks looking for housing, folks building housing, realtors, that sort of thing. So it's not, we're not waiting for feedback to move forward. A lot of this work is based on feedback. The idea of holding a public hearing to consider an ordinance that's this complex is a little daunting.
Sure.
Because this will be a pretty major rewrite of some of our zoning work. We're right now kind of ramping up our communications about the project with the public. I don't know that we're anticipating that generating a lot of feedback necessarily, but we're open to that, of course. the schedule is that we're trying to get back to the Planning Commission in May with a draft ordinance that addresses all the things that they've talked about. So the list that Tim covered is the third meeting that we've had to talk about housing related zoning issues. And in prior meetings, we've dealt with lot sizes and setbacks and R1 versus R2 versus other things. And all that stuff now will be incorporated into one ordinance amendment document that we'll be looking at hopefully in May, and we can start the process of consideration then.
Great. All right. Sounds good.
Cool. All right, anyone else? Updates? I've got one. Okay, I'll go first, then you go, Kelly. The library board met on Monday night. It was a virtual meeting. We're currently looking for a city rep for the library board and a county rep for the library board. So those are our positions that, if anyone wants to be on the library board, jump in. Library director Amanda St. John said that the staff have definitely been staying busy. They have a very long to-do list, and they are knocking it down pretty quickly, which is really great. That means that when they're ready to open, they'll be, back up to tip-top condition, really, with having all of the collection culling done and all of the other little projects that they haven't been able to do due to staffing taken care of. They also relisted the assistant director position. They had gotten 5 candidates, but due to the delays that had happened due to the coronavirus stuff, they decided to relist it just to see if they could get more candidates. And the plan, they have a plan in the works for reopening the library for curbside, or not curbside, window pickup, and that would be happening when we can figure it out and get everything in place. I think it's the American Library Association recommends at least a 24-hour period of quarantine for books coming back to make sure that that they're safe. I believe it's the Arrowhead Libraries system has been saying 3 days. So there's a bunch of different organizations that are saying different things. But what our library and director feel is comfortable would be a 7-day quarantine of goods that are returned, but then they would still be able to be circulated. So that would be a hand through a window kind of thing. People would make the reservations for the books that they want online, and then using the system that's already in place, and then people would be able to go and pick those up at the library through a hand. They would just hand them through a window, and then all drop-offs would happen at the outside drop-off bin. So that's in the works. Hopefully that'll be able to come through in the next couple of weeks, but we're not sure when the time frame will be for that. That's really the only one that I have. Anybody else have any updates? Kelly, you have one.
I didn't have an update. I just had a question before we go. I know, and maybe Mike will cover it when he finishes up here, but I know that supposedly our Highway 61 project will get going May 18th. I'm wondering if we have any of the, whether it's KGM or MnDOT crew, I believe I've heard maybe a few of them. Are any staying in the campground? Are we opening up any spots for them? Because I know that fits with the governor's order. And what the plan is there, whether we would have a bathroom or anything open available for them, or if they're not using anything at all.
We don't currently have any campsites that we'll be using for workers. It is something that's allowed under the governor's order, but the park board's conversation at their meeting last week was that they're not comfortable opening at all yet. So they'll have a chance to revisit that conversation at their regular meeting, which is next Tuesday. and we'll see how it goes. In the meantime, I don't believe we've been contacted by any of KGM's contractors looking for campsites. If we have, then I'm sure what we told them was we're closed.
Okay. Does that work?
Yeah, that's an answer.
Okay, cool. Does anybody have any other business? Hearing none. Everybody stay safe and get outside and enjoy some of the beautiful weather. And we'll see you next Wednesday. We
Thank
are.
Have a good evening, everyone.
Good night.
Thanks for.
Good night. Bye-bye.
Good night.
Bye.